welcome to the final lesson in terms of the content, looking at this big question: how had the Allied powers defeated the Axis powers by 1945? So that's still our main heading, but this is the heading to write down: how did the Allies progress towards Berlin? So this is part 2 of that lesson, and there are 3 key terms here: the Reich Chancellery, so that's a building, and it's where the Chancellor, the leader of Germany, worked. That obviously was Hitler at this time. The Führerbunker is the underground place underneath actually the Reich Chancellery where Hitler was hiding as the Allies invaded Berlin. And then a word that you may know already, bombardment, which means a continuous attack with bombs or shells or other missiles. So pause the video and write those down. Okay, Connect activity this week. There's a list of 6 events here that we have studied over the last few lessons. Your first challenge is to put them into the correct chronological order. And then for each event, you can do that if you want to draw a timeline. You can do it on a line across your page or down your page, and then write them in the right places. They're in the wrong order at the moment. And then for each one, can you add a sentence or draw an image that you remember from previous lessons? Use the work that you've done, look back in your book or back in the documents that you have used to help you to do that. So that's the Connect task. There's a couple of pictures here. You should be able to work out what these ones are. We've got the D-Day landings, we've got the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and then we've got Operation Barbarossa in the bottom. Okay, so use those or make your own to help you do this timeline correctly. So pause the video while you do that. So what we're going to look at this lesson is the advance on Berlin from the beginning of 1945 through to May 1945 when the Nazis surrendered. So the first event is where we finished last lesson, so the Allied troops winning that Battle of the Bulge and beginning their march into Germany. It took them until the beginning of March to take control of the last crossing over the River Rhine. Now, as the Germans retreated back into Germany, they tended to blow up bridges. So in fact, the Americans managed to make a bridge across the River Rhine, and that means that the way is now open for them to go to Berlin. But what's happening on the other side, on the east of Berlin, is that the Soviets are coming. And so we'll look at this on the 15th of April. The Soviets actually get closer to Berlin first. And by the 26th of April, they are actually attacking that German building, the Reich Chancellery, where the main German building in Berlin. On the 30th of April, this is kind of a spoiler, Hitler and his new wife commit suicide. So they refuse to surrender. They would rather die than surrender. And on the same day, so a new Führer is created, but he refuses to surrender even though Hitler is dead. But on the 7th of May, so just a few days later, Germany signs the unconditional surrender and war ends in Europe. So that's where we're going today. We are getting to the end of the Second World War. Okay, let's have a look at this source from a man called Martin Bormann, who was a key Nazi official, and he's speaking in February 1945. So the Americans and the Soviet troops are coming towards Berlin, and this is the command and the message that is coming out from him. He's talking about what Hitler wants. So Hitler is the Führer. So there's 4 questions there for you to answer. So make sure you put a subheading, the German attitude in 1945. And let's read the source together. So this is what he says. The Führer, Hitler, expects that the Gauleiters, who are party leaders of different regions in Germany, will implement the task placed before them with the necessary severity and consistently and ruthlessly suppress every sign of disintegration, cowardice and defeatism with death sentences. Anyone not prepared to fight for his people but who stabs them in the back in his gravest hour does not deserve to live and must fall to the executioner. So there's quite a lot of hard language in that source. We've got the word implement here, which just means to do. And then severity, you might be able to see the word severe in there. So severity is being really hard and severe with something. Being consistent means you do it. It doesn't matter, you know, what day of the week it is or whether you like somebody or not. You're always very consistent. That's something you like about your teachers when they're consistent. To be ruthless means to have no pity. So you're not going to listen to anybody's sob story or any reason, any excuses. You're just going to get them if they do the wrong thing. And what it is, the wrong thing, is this: disintegration, cowardice, and defeatism. And so these things are being cowardly is obvious, it's feeling afraid. Defeatism is anybody who maybe would say, oh, I don't think we're going to win, I think we should stop fighting. Disintegration is when maybe things start falling apart and people aren't obeying orders and sticking together really well. So stabbing somebody in the back, you might know this. This is a phrase that means that if you're betraying somebody, you're not being a good friend, you're not doing as you should to them, you're not being loyal. Okay, so pause the video and have a go at answering questions. So what does Bormann suggest will happen to someone who refuses to fight? Do you think this could say he seems confident that they're going to win or not? What evidence would you use to support that? And what else can you work out from this source? So pause the video while you have a go at those questions. Here are some suggestions for the answers. So again, pause the video and just have a look at these so you can check your answers against these. Okay, the advance to Berlin then. So you can see on the map here, the red area is the area that had been held by the Nazis, and the blue you can see here, the British, American and French are coming from the west, and the Soviets, along with some Polish armies as well, Polish groups, are coming from the east. So after the Allied defence at the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans are in retreat and the Soviets are advancing. Hitler goes into that bunker hoping that he can hold out in Berlin. Berlin is just here towards the east of Germany. This picture is a really interesting one. I really liked it when I saw it. So this is a tree carving. A soldier has carved into the bark of this tree, and you can still see it now, that he's put the date there, March 1945, and it says "Death to the Germans." So this is a Soviet soldier writing this, and although the Americans had crossed the River Rhine, as we talked about, on the 7th of March and could have raced on to Berlin, General Eisenhower decides that Berlin is not a particularly important objective. He thinks there's more other things to do, other parts of Germany that maybe are more important. So the final battle between Germany and the Soviets, or Russia, begins on April the 15th, 1945, and the Soviets are lined up along the banks of the River Oder to the east, 40 miles to the east of Berlin, and they are attacking and trying to get across that river. It's a really, really hard battle for the Soviets. They lose 30,000 men and the Germans only lose 10,000. But the Germans have to move back after this. So the German resistance is broken. The Soviets can make their progress. But it's obviously a very costly battle for the Soviets. They lose so many men. So you can see here on this map the River Oder on this side here. And the Soviet forces then begin to push over the river, and Berlin is here. And you can see they are surrounding. The American forces are here, and they do meet the Soviet forces on the River Elbe, which is here, but it's the Soviet forces that are the ones who take Berlin. So they surround it, but they still need to then capture the capital. So on the 26th of April, this first image on the left-hand side shows the Reich Chancellery building, and the Führer bunker is beneath that, and you can see that that's really been destroyed, and there are tanks here at the front of the building. And then you can see on the right-hand side, I wanted to show you this picture of the kind of people who were defending Berlin at this stage. So because the war had gone on for so long, really the only people who were left in Berlin were older people, children and women. And so many of them were fighting in Berlin to try to defend the city. And you can see how old and tired many of these people in the Volkssturm, which is the People's Army, are looking. And then I wanted to show you this final picture showing the tanks and some of the ruins of Berlin. So this is the Soviet army coming in, and you can see the state that Berlin is in as a result of this bombardment. So as we looked at on the timeline, Hitler commits suicide. So on the 29th of April, he marries Eva Braun in this bunker, and on the 30th of April, the two of them commit suicide. And on that same day, the Soviet troops come in and they put that red flag with the golden sickle and crescent over the Berlin, over the city. And the German army agreed to stop fighting. So the country hasn't surrendered, the government hasn't surrendered, that new government hasn't surrendered, but the army stopped fighting. And then it takes 5 more days for Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz to surrender. But at that point, the war was over in Europe. Let's have a look at this source then. It's a Soviet source, it's a Soviet cartoon. You can see that, we can tell that because you can see the writing here. These are in Russian, so you can see it's different kind of writing than we use in Britain. So have a go at answering the questions here on this side. So the source is called "The Big Three Will Tie the Enemy in Knots." So look carefully and answer these questions in full sentences. So who are the big three? You should be able to tell by the cuffs on their arms. Have a look at Hitler. What does he look like? Does he look scary? Or how does he look in this cartoon? What do you think the cartoonist thinks of him? Have a look carefully at the object on the floor. You should be able to work out what you can see there. What does that say? And then the last question, sorry, you can't really see it because of the video. What is the message of this cartoon? What do you think the artist here, the man who drew this, what do you think he wanted people to think when they saw this? Why do you think he drew it? What do you think his message was? So pause the video while you answer that. Okay, and then the final thing to do this lesson, this is quite a big piece of writing, is a narrative account like we've done before. And so we're going to do a narrative account using the work that we've done in the last 2 lessons, so last week and this week. Key things to remember: keep it in chronological order, make sure you're linking up between events and follow the guidance. So here's the first step, and it shows you how to give some really precise details. So you can use that to help you. Don't copy it, but use it to help you. Link up then to the second event. So you can see that what we've got here is it says this meant that. This meant, and so you can see that that's showing the link between what's just happened and what then happened afterwards. And so that then links on. The next event was the Battle of the Bulge that we looked at last lesson. So now you can explain the Battle of the Bulge from last lesson. Can you give some of those details? Use your work from last time. Can you link on then to what we've done this lesson? And then finally explain what we've looked at this lesson. So some details about what happened at the end of the war and those last events in Berlin and the end of the war in Europe. Well done. Final thing to do is complete the Consolidate quiz. That's in a separate assignment on Teams that will check your understanding from this lesson. Well done.